In July 2000, a film was released that would essentially change the face of modern cinema, is it safe to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely correct.
Director Bryan Singer's X-Men came out to a huge box office critical acclaim. At the time, everybody loved it. It did a good job, I think, meeting the audience expectations of that time.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Because
Definitely.
let's face it, 2000, as we discussed in the previous episodes, there wasn't a lot of competition at the box office when it came to comic book superhero movies.
Mm-hmm. Like you said, I think you Blade and a couple flops, and that was it. After X-Men 1 comes out and it's this huge hit, there's this sudden rush by all the other studios to make more superhero films when they realize that X-Men 1 makes like 300 million, grosses
Right.
about 3 times the budget.
So yeah, right. Like so in 2000, Hollywood does what it does to this day, what it has done since the beginning of cinema. If something is a huge hit, let's get another one. So 20th
Yes.
Century Fox, Marvel Entertainment immediately rush into the production of X2 X-Men United.
It
So
could take 3 years for it to come out, but still cool.
at that time, that was the norm for a big tentpole movie. Even Star Wars, it was 3 years in between each installment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Once again, welcome to Backseat Filmmaker. We let the real filmmakers do all the driving while we sit in the back and bitch about it. I'm Ryan
Yeah.
Bijan, and it is an honor to once again be reunited with Mr.
Connor Quade, it's a pleasure to be back. It's been way too long. So happy to be up, Ryan, host again, and let's get into it, man.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff to talk about, not just within the X-Men franchise, but in our own lives and the state of pop culture and entertainment today. There's a lot to catch up on.
Yes, yes, we've been gone. We've been gone for a minute, man.
Yeah, I know those first few episodes, they were sort of that had some interesting reactions, but Bryan Singer is a polarizing figure.
Yes, yes. I wouldn't say it's I wouldn't say people, have a very let me rephrase that. I wouldn't say that people have a lukewarm opinion of Bryan Singer. You either you have very strong opinions about him. But I mean, I rarely met someone who's like, he's okay. You either
Yeah,
love him or hate him, you know.
yeah.
And the comments I think reflected that. We didn't get many, but there were a few people being like, what the fuck are you guys doing? This is dumb, and
Yeah.
like that's fine, But I think a lot of people, I was surprised at how many people actually liked X-Men 1. There were a lot of people who I talked to or who commented that actually liked X-Men 1 a lot, and a lot of people who still actually think it's really good.
Right. Well, I mean, that's I think one of the big reasons we're doing this podcast is because that first X-Men was such an important watershed film, not just for our childhoods, in our formative years, but
Yeah.
for cinema today. I don't think we would be getting Spider-Man 17 with Tom Holland, Alfred Molina, Tobey Maguire. They wouldn't be throwing everything in the kitchen sink at it if that film was a flop. Like we probably wouldn't
Aren't
have
they aren't
Raimi
they
Spider-Man.
aren't they calling the new Spider-Man 3? Isn't that what they're calling it?
I mean, the
Or
official
no?
title is No Way Home. I think Spider-Man 3
Oh,
is like the
okay.
working title, but
I was about to say you can't steal that. You can't steal
yeah.
Spider-Man 3.
Well, hey, remember last time they made a movie called Spider-Man 3 and they tried to throw everything but the kitchen sink at it? Let's see.
That went well.
Let's not nothing. I mean, you know what? I will defend all the Raimi trilogy. I think
Oh yeah. There's a
even
lot to defend. There's a lot to
yeah,
defend.
that'll be our next podcast series, the films of Sam Raimi.
The films of Sam Raimi.
We'll get on to it. But yeah, as we've established, 20th Century Fox immediately greenlighted the X-Men sequel, which would eventually see the light of day in July 2003, which, like you said, a full 3 years.
I think it was May
Oh,
2000.
my mistake. X-Men 1 was July, X2 was May 2003.
Mm.
And as we were talking about, like now that seems sort of like 3 years feels like a long time because how many Marvel movies, how many DC movies do they put out a year?
It's at least 2 or 3 a year at this point, right? for both
Right.
studios.
Like literally within the past 5 years, how many times has Tom Holland played Spider-Man? Like no joke, within
Too
five
many.
years.
Too many.
Right, but in 2003, there was sort of a different climate. It was just a different time in Hollywood. A movie of this magnitude
Mhm.
would take a few years to get right.
Yes, yes. And also people way back then. It was all still kind of the air on how to even get these movies made and how to get them make sense, you know. Like there was just I think there wasn't really a template for the rainy Spider-Man X2, like these huge budgeted superhero movies. No one had really done that yet. Since, at least since Superman. And you know, these budgets were getting higher and higher, so it was of course going to take a little longer, I think, before people really knew how to just you know, shit out sequels, you know, to a year. You know, this was before that. So
Yeah.
like the language of a hero film had not really been established about an audience even after X-Men 1 and Spider-Man. It would still
Well,
take a while.
yeah, like even, when Batman came out in 1989, that was a huge success, but you can tell even then Tim Burton wasn't quite comfortable with the Richard Donner formula. He kind of did his own thing with it. So it all felt very experimental, even in
Mhm.
1989, and that would go on throughout the next decade.
Yeah, especially Batman Returns. That's pretty experimental, I would say.
Well, if we're talking about experimental, look in the 90s, you had a mixture of movies like The Rocketeer, The Phantom, these old pulp serials, and then movies like The Crow with Brandon Lee. It was sort of all
Mhm.
over the Spawn with Michael Jai White and John Leguizamo. There's a lot of interesting
Sort of
stuff.
R-rated.
Right, right.
I think it's interesting. I think they kind of thought that stop some they would rather appeal to adults who had read comics in the past than people reading them now. That's what it kind of seemed like in the 90s. I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, good stuff.
All right, Connor. So, what are your impressions of X2 X-Men United?
X2 X-Men United. I have a lot of impressions about it. I would say overall, I think it's a fantastic movie. I do think it's not as good as X-Men 1 in my opinion, but it is a very powerful film with great action and really interesting themes. I saw it in theaters in 2003. I was 11, and I just loved it. I loved it. I loved it since the moment I saw that movie. I do like X-Men 1 more just because I feel like it stands on its own a little better. But X-Men 2 has a lot of interesting stuff going on in it. Also, like X-Men 1 because Brian is doing it.
Yeah.
I don't
Well,
know. What about you?
X2, it's one of those movies where I feel like I have to take myself back to 2003. I remember being 12 years old. I was on the IMDb message boards. I was kind of like the internet, it was a thing,
Yeah.
right? So you would read the reviews, the fan comments. When this movie came out, I'll never forget. People were calling it the best superhero movie ever made. It blew
Yes.
X-Men 1 out of the water. This movie's taking things to the next level. It's bigger, it's badder, it does justice to
Mm-hmm.
the material. There was a lot of high praise for this film. I mean, the first one
Mm-hmm.
was relatively well received, but I don't know if it was because of low expectations or what, but X2 certainly seemed to have surpassed those expectations for the wider audience.
Yes, I remember a lot of people saying that in 2003 when X2 came out. That it was not only the best superhero movie ever, like
Yeah,
ever, like we're talking back to Superman. Like people are saying it's the best superhero movie of all time. It's the best comic book movie of all time. A lot of people were saying that too. Not even just superhero, just anything based off a comic, it was better than. And it's pretty much the exact same reaction that Spider-Man 2 got the year after. I just think that after Spider-Man 1, it was a little funnier, a little broader. People were ready for the darker X2. They
yeah,
wanted a darker movie, I think, and they got it. They got it for sure.
right. But then, so you did ask me what my opinion of the film is.
Yeah,
I'm not trying to.
absolutely.
I think it's fine. It's a good movie. I don't want to be a contrarian or anything, but
Please, please, man. That's why we're here.
yeah. Well, I think in the greater scope of like the climate of Marvel films, comic book movies since that movie came out, I think X-Men 2 holds up very well. Very entertaining. It's a good movie. Like if it's on TV, I'll stop and watch it.
Mm.
I would definitely take it any day over something like Ant-Man and the Wasp or the Eternals or whatever else is outright.
Yeah, well, obviously, yeah. I mean, that's just. I mean, if you don't think that, we have problems.
Right, but going back to what you said, I think the reason I would not rank X2 over X1 is because X-Men 1, it's one of those perfect movies. It's like the original Star Wars. It has a beginning, middle, and end. It does a good
Mm,
job summarizing 40 years up to that point of X-Men material, the moral themes, humans versus the outsiders, the minorities fighting amongst each other for dominance. Like, should we do we
mm,
enslave the human race or do we protect them? It, obviously, you have to if you're going to do one X-Men movie, you have to have Magneto as the villain, but it also has the
yes.
whole political aspect of the United States government. What do we do with these problematic minorities? That's ultimately what X-Men is about. Am I
Mhm.
right? Am I wrong?
You're absolutely right, and I think bringing back the evil politician Kelly for
Yeah,
X2,
right.
very good move by Singer. Even though he's like dead and being Mystique is like impersonating him,
Yeah,
I just think that that character is a fascinating character. That Kelly character, like I said, the 9/11 foreshadowing in X1,
yeah.
he is the harbinger. He's the harbinger of that foreshadowing, I would say.
Absolutely, and I think Senator Kelly, Bruce Davidson, right? It was the
Yeah,
actor.
Bruce Davison. Yeah, great actor, Bruce Davison.
He did a great job embodying that archetype, that type of character. But to me, X1 did such a perfect job. If there was never another X-Men movie made after that, I feel like it's a great representation of the material with the beginning, middle, and ends.
Mhm.
Now, X-Men
Yes,
2,
for how much?
oh, I'm sorry, go on.
Oh, I just said for how much Brian cut out of it. It seems very well structured. That's just what I was gonna say.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. X2, I do feel like it builds upon X-Men 1. It is a bigger budget movie. There are bigger action set pieces. There's a lot of like visually interesting stuff happening. But I think at the end
Mhm.
of the day, X2, it doesn't really you can't watch and appreciate X2 as a movie if you're not already familiar with X-Men 1 or the comic books. And I do feel
Yes.
like in hindsight, like at the time, it was the greatest comic book movie ever made because it was building on X-Men 1. But at that point, and it does kind of leave on a cliffhanger. It leaves it open for this big grand finale.
Mhm.
And we can get into that
Mhm.
more later.
It's very much a Wrath of Khan type ending. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
the
yeah,
ending of Wrath of Khan. It's pretty much very much that kind of like I need to know what happens next. Very much that kind of ending
yeah. And I
for
think in
sure.
retrospect, after the release of X-Men 3: The Last Stand, a lot of people were underwhelmed by what they got. So I do feel like
Mhm.
historically, if you look back at X2, it is kind of stuck in this interesting position in this franchise that would go on to be rebooted multiple times within the same continuity. So it's interesting that X2 doesn't quite have the same reverence and relevance today as it did 15 years ago.
Yes, yes. I think that's like we'll talk about X-Men 3 later.
Yeah,
But like you said, just the disappointment I think around that film tarnished the first two and especially X-Men 2 to the
yeah.
point where X-Men 2 is like no one's even putting it in the conversation of best superhero movie anymore
It,
because like you said, it's just stuck. Like you
it's a
said, it's just stuck in
it's a
between it.
it's a bridge to nowhere, I think is kind of
Mhm.
what it ends up being. But but looked upon at its own merits as a piece of entertainment, as a piece of pop culture, I think it's a very good movie.
Yes, yes, and it's still really well directed, and
Yeah,
we'll go through the film a lot too. And John Ottman came back to edit score it, so it's well
yeah,
done that
yeah,
way as
yeah,
well. We'll talk about all of that. I do think that it's a very well done film. I think maybe story wise, there are flaws in it that I think both of us agree they spend too much time in that fucking bunker,
well, that's half the
and
movie. Yeah,
but yeah. And so but to me like there's just a lot of positive stuff in it, a lot of interesting themes that like you said, just comparing it to the MCU, it's clearly much better. And there's just so much more going on, and that's what makes it a Bryan Singer film in my
yeah.
opinion.
I mean, if you want to talk adventure, if you want to talk the MCU, X-Men 1 got X2, The Avengers got Age of Ultron. Which one is clearly the better sequel?
Yikes.
Yeah.
I saw Age of Ultron in theaters and I was very sad.
But to be fair, I think Age of Ultron kind of has the opposite problem, whereas the film in and of itself is a pretty weak retread of the previous movie. But at least
Hmm.
I think I know you're not a fan, but I feel like at least Avengers Infinity War and Endgame kind of made up for that. So they stuck
I
to the
heard that,
landing.
yeah.
Yeah, they stuck to the landing and had a strong finale. So I do think history is kinder to Age of Ultron because it's like, oh, even though this movie is not very good, it does lead to something much bigger and better, which X-Men 2 unfortunately did not.
Yes, that's a really interesting dichotomy. And
Yeah.
yeah, but Age of Ultron, kind of like X2, you don't hear much about Age of Ultron either. And I don't know, man. You don't hear a lot about that film.
Well, I think we've talked about how
But
yeah.
oh, nothing.
Oh, sorry. No, I was just gonna say, I think we've talked about how comic book fans, Marvel fans are very fickle. As soon as the
Mhm.
movie comes out, it's forgotten in 2 years. People are on to the next big thing, the next
Right.
Spider-Man iteration, the next
Batman.
D-list, the next Batman. It's all about moving on. There's not a lot of time to reflect on. You know, Iron Man 1, I remember when that was a new movie. I saw it opening weekend, and that just
Hmm.
seems like a million years ago.
Yeah, man. I saw that on opening weekend too, and the whole crowd loved it. It was one of the just a great experience. Really, really love that movie. Love Iron Man.
Yeah. So did you want to break down X2 sort of scene by scene? Was there anything in particular that stuck out to you?
Yeah, we can go through the scenes. We one of the production stories. First, it's kind of up to you.
Okay, well, let's
You
start
know,
from the beginning. So once X2 is green lighted, it became sort of this big whirlwind adventure for everybody. What's sort of the first
mhm.
notable story from the production of the film?
So there's a couple big stories revolving around Singer's bad behavior on the set, pretty much, especially in regards to how he
Really?
treat. Yeah.
Really? Wow. Okay.
especially especially in regards of how he treats his actors and fellow producers.
Mhm.
And I'm not going to read the whole story, but essentially what happened on the set of X-Men 2 is that Tom DeSanto, who is Bryan Singer's producing partner, who was accused in the app pupil lawsuit that we talked about in episode 1,
Yeah,
he's still working with Bryan Singer. He's like I guess he's like the line producer or something, but he's
right.
also like a real producer. And apparently he shut down the production of X-Men 2 in the middle of shooting because he heard that Singer was incapacitated after taking a narcotic and had given other crew members the same drug.
Jeez.
And all the main cast, with the exception of Ian McKellen, were in the scene. It's like that. We're in the scene that day. It was the scene on the X jet, like in the middle of the movie.
Yeah.
And but DeSanto basically came on set and was like, no, we're done. And Singer basically said, fuck you. He continued shooting, leading to a botched stunt that left Hugh Jackman bleeding on camera because no stunt coordinator was present because that scene was supposed to be shot the following day.
Well, what was the action sequence? Do you remember? Can you point out in the film which scene that was?
I think it's whenever they're in the I think it's when they're in the plane and they're either like landing it or on the water or something, or like there's some botched landing in the movie
Yeah,
at some point. I can't really remember. I think it's that scene.
yeah.
Um, but so Ralph Winter, who you remember also produced X-Men 1 with Laura Schuler Donner, um stopped the production and the next day sided with Singer over Tom DeSanto and told Tom DeSanto to return to LA. And that's when all the cast members, minus McKellen and Rebecca Romaine in their X-Men costumes, went to Bryan Singer's trailer and pretty much yelled at him and said, if you put DeSanto back in LA, we're quitting.
Oh
And
wow.
and so they're all in his trailer threatening to quit, right? If Tom DeSanto leaves, because he's the only one who can keep Bryan on a leash. And Halle Berry said, "You can kiss my black ass," right? This isn't an article from the Hollywood Reporter, the one from a couple years ago.
Yes,
And a representative for Singer said that nothing like that ever happened.
of course.
And DeSanto declined to comment on the fight. Okay, so that is the Hollywood Reporter's thing. Now we're gonna go into what Bryan actually says about this incident because he was interviewed about it and did correct the record a little bit. So in an interview with Empire magazine, he recalled the squabbling involving fellow producer Tom DeSanto. Quote, "We got into an argument and were late shooting and certain actors were pissed, two in particular, one who had to wear a lot of makeup." And she said that we had a conference in one of the trailers and Hallie stormed out, but she didn't say what was quoted. And then Singer continues, "No, she actually said, you can watch my black ass while I walk out of here. It's even better. That's why I remember it." End quote. So Singer just really thinks it's no big deal, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's one of the big that was like a big story that was broken around the time Bryan Singer got canceled, like around the Bohemian Rhapsody, the time he got cut from Bohemian Rhapsody. And this was a really, really big story. There was articles everywhere about this story, and I just think it's kind of a funny, crazy story. I don't get why people are so mad about it, but that's just me. I don't know. What do you think of that shit?
I wasn't there at the time, but having worked on some big productions, I'm currently working on a major Hollywood TV show where,
Mhm.
it's the budget, I believe, is a $10 million an episode, a pretty big
Wow.
sprawling piece. And it's certainly the biggest thing I've ever been a part of. But when you're on a set like that, it's shocking to me the lack of coordination and communication across the board.
Hmm.
Now I know I'm pretty down, at the bottom of the barrel, down on the totem pole, but I feel like even amongst like the different departments, it seems like the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing.
Hmm.
And I think ultimately it
Hmm.
goes up to like it goes, to the producer, the showrunner, whoever. I think in Brian's case, the director, it seems like he has a lot of power. So I believe it. I mean, I believe, hey, if you're on set, do it. Why not knock it? But part of me, as a filmmaker myself, I do admire Brian's attitude. Like, we're here, we might as well get the shot. Let's knock it out. But I
Mhm.
don't recommend doing it under any unsafe circumstances. There's probably a better coordinator around.
Yes, yes. That's what I think is so crazy about that story is
Yeah.
like I don't know. Brian, I think, was clearly fucked up on something. I don't know what it was. He might have just been stressed out or on too much coffee, but he was not in his right mind.
But we've
Um
established Brian was in pain. His back was hurting for carrying this franchise.
absolutely was taking pain medication for a bad back on the set of X-Men 1,
Yeah.
X-Men 2, and Superman Returns and the rest of his movies. So just always have that in the back of your mind when any of this shit comes up, probably on some kind of pain pills, you
Yeah.
know. Um,
I mean, it is a high pressure, high stress job. I don't know if I can blame him for that.
yeah, I have this great article from 2003 with Newsweek that interviewed a lot of the principals involved with the filming of X-Men 2. So remember, this is from 2003, back when everyone still liked Brian and nobody wanted to destroy his reputation. And so from the Newsweek article, this is Brian talking about that quote Halle Berry incident.
Yeah.
And he just says, quote, "Some gossipy freaky person decides to embellish a story and some idiot calls the New York Post, which is a tabloid. It's not even a fucking newspaper. It's not relevant enough for me to sue them, although I could."
Dude, that's great.
What a fucking badass. I'm sorry. He's awesome.
So that's yeah.
I wanted to go to what we're kind of saying about Singer's flare-ups, these explosions that he has, you know.
Flare-ups. Okay, I like that.
Um
Yeah.
so story this is from that same Newsweek article. It says stories about Singer's sudden explosions, kicking chairs and screaming at crew members pop up almost every time he makes a movie. His outbursts have become a running joke with his crew and collaborators, who nonetheless worked with him on multiple films. "It's an urban legend," says X2 screenwriter Dan Harris, "but seeing it firsthand is a different story." And then Michael Dougherty said, the other co-writer, Michael Dougherty, said, "I've read about Hiroshima, but I have never stood in the middle of an atomic bomb." That's how he describes Singer's flare-ups.
Jeez.
So this is from the article. It says some believe Singer's, tantrums are stress related. The cast and crew on X2 numbered nearly 2,000 people, and he had to, take care of all that. And this is a quote: "It's just hard to orchestrate that many people," says Famke Johnson, who plays Jean Grey. "You have to deal with daily frustrations because nothing is ever done, nothing is ever ready. I don't have a problem with it," she laughs. "I happen to like chaos." It should be noted, in fact, that every person interviewed before this story spoke about Singer with real affection. His tirades, they say, are about his drive for perfection and fueled by the exhaustion of working endless 16-hour days, as well as an occasional touch of insecurity. I always say to Brian, I love you despite yourself, says Laura Schiller Donner, the producer. When he starts up, I just either roll my eyes or I start laughing. In his heart, he's a good guy, but honestly, he can't help himself sometimes.
Well, you know what? When you're talking about these 12 to 16-hour days, that's the reality of show business. But at the same
Mm.
time, if he is such an erratic maniac, which there do seem to be a lot of, there does seem to be a lot of corroborating evidence that the man does have a temper, he can get out of control. At the same time, you pointed out earlier, his cast and crew, these are people that would willingly work for him on multiple films. They would come back. So if he
Yes.
was so erratic, if he was so destructive, why would you have hundreds of people still wanting to work with this guy?
Exactly. And I think that's what kind of is so interesting about this article specifically is the loyalty all these people he's working with have for him, even though he has these tantrums. I
Yeah.
don't know. But they also said in 2003 that he was taking pain pills that prevented him from being able to shoot, you know. I don't know. But he said that he was in pain for the entire shoot because of a hip injury. But Brian said, I took no drug that made me woozy and unable to work, referring to the argument.
Yeah.
He said, he's like, in fact, that day, I not only wrote one of the more interesting moments in the picture, but I shot it and was in the editing room all evening. Meanwhile, Tom DeSanto, who reprimanded the pill dispensing crew member, and Singer came out, and that's what he got mad about. So what happened is that Tom DeSanto started yelling at a crew member who was dispensing pills, and then Singer found out and banned him from the set.
Oh, wow.
So he was protecting his crew. That's what Singer was doing. I think this is what we're talking about, the loyalty here, you
Yeah.
know.
And I,
Singer also said, "Oh, that was nothing. Tom and I, God, we've had some real fights." That's what he said. That's just a quote from Singer. So I don't think that the fight was that big of a deal. It's just the way he works, according to this information.
right. And when you talk about loyalty to the crew and sticking up for the little guy, that is one thing I noticed when I worked on The Gifted. Bryan
Mm-hmm.
Singer's the one director, especially one on that level, where he would come down and talk to you like you were a human being. It didn't matter if you're in craft services, if you were Laura Schuler Donner who was on set, or if you were an extra. He would just talk to you like a normal human being. Hey guys, how are you doing? If he had a flare up, if he was upset about something, he would apologize to everybody after the fact. Be like, look, safety is my top concern. I just want to make sure
Wow.
you guys are okay. Like he was
Mm-hmm.
very communicative. Whereas on this current project I'm working on, the first major director, he never introduced himself to the extras. He doesn't give a shit. Like he's barely communicating with the principals. He's mostly in Video Village, which I
Wow.
understand. He's the producer. He's a big exec. He's got a lot of stuff on his plate. But it was a completely different working style than what I observed with Brian.
And I promise you, Brian has more on his plate than that guy.
Yeah,
Just saying, man. The
or
guy was,
he did at one point. Yeah,
yeah. So I don't know. I just think that's a really interesting story that the
yeah,
fight that everyone publicized is actually Brian sticking up for his own crew.
I believe it. I
I,
believe it.
I don't know. I don't know. And this is just another quote from the article from Brian. He says, I seem to be fascinated with identity, with people not being what they seem. That's just what he said in 2003. And I think that applies to every one of his films.
Yeah,
So I wanted to move on now to the writing of X-Men 2. There's a really good interview with the writers, Harris and Doherty, complete writers, and hired by Bryan Singer to come on to do the biggest movie of the summer. And it's really interesting, hearing what they have to say. So,
well, I think
they're interviewing them. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say, I remember at the time I was like, yeah, Michael Dougherty, Dan Harris, who are these guys? These professional Hollywood writers. And I looked them up, and it's like, who are these twinks? Like, where did he find these guys?
They look like us.
They look like, yeah. I mean, well, even probably younger at the time. It's just like,
Yeah.
if you want to look up a picture of a Brian boy in a dictionary, they would probably be up there in some. I don't want to imply anything. I'm not suggesting anything, but I mean,
I am.
yeah. I, like I am curious about like how they met and like the circumstances. Like, all right, these are two smart college guys. We'll let them write this huge tentpole movie.
Yeah, okay. So so this is just about them talking with Singer right
Yeah,
now, or working with Singer. This is just about them talking about working with Singer for this one. It
right.
says it's a unique experience to be in your first real job working on X2. A young kid just a year out of college, says Dan Harris, and knocking on major stars' trailers and bowing to them and saying, "I'm sorry, Ian, Sir Ian, the scene has changed. Here's your new dialogue. We're shooting in 20."
Yeah.
And it says a Singer is honest about demands he makes of the young writers. The writers recall one instance where he, Brian Singer, held up filming for 21 to 22 hours, insisting on immediate rewrites from Harris and Doherty in front of 200 cast and crew members, only to decide to return to the original script as written. It's the
Jeez.
kind of it's the kind of devotion to the finished product that Singer admires in Harris and Doherty. They were dedicated to the movie, not to their fee, says Brian Singer. That's something a lot of writers in this town don't do. So I love that story where he stops the filming for a day to have this thing rewritten and then just goes back to the original script.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it shows
uh,
you Brian cares about the material and he wants the best product possible.
absolutely.
And sometimes
Absolutely.
you have to try it. You have to try it out. Sometimes things work, sometimes they don't. And
Mm-hmm.
but he's not above admitting, like, okay, I was wrong. Let's just stick to the original idea.
Yes, yes. And the Harris and Doherty met at an after party of the final performance of Cats in New York City. And this is a quote from Harris. He said the party was half filled with theater elites like Andrew Lloyd Webber and Cameron McIntosh, and the other half was Cats super fans like us, people who dressed as Rum Tum Tugger. And he said, Mike and I were on the outside thinking, how do we end up here? And I think maybe we'll get into this later, but Gary Goddard, who will come up later in this podcast, is also heavily involved with Broadway productions. So I think there may be a connection here that we don't know.
Okay.
So this is what Doherty said from an article in 2003. The way the development process for X2 worked was very, very informal. We turned in hundreds of drafts just to Brian. He's so involved in the story and the development of the screenplay that we were giving him a new script with a couple of drafts every week. Working with Brian is a collaboration that takes place all day long, every day. This is what Dan Harris said. He's like, we present some new ideas to him. We talk about everything, and everything is developed before it gets officially released in a draft. This wasn't any type of normal writing situation where we would turn in a draft to the studio and then get notes back. It was just pure collaboration with everybody. So basically, they would go in there like and into Brian's office at Fox, and they would meet for a couple hours, go over the scenes, and then take it home, work on it, and then come back. And then sometimes he would sit with us for 12 hours reading the script line by line.
Yeah.
And this is what Harris said. He says it really harkens back to the old studio system of writers that work at the studio and are always available for collaboration, and there's no such thing as the draft. Draft wise, in total, we did about 26 drafts for the studio and 150 individually just for Brian.
Mhm.
So, like, I think that the writing of X-Men 2, it's very different in terms of X-Men 1, but
Yeah.
it still kind of sounds the same. Like they're rewriting it always, and there's shitloads of drafts. So I guess this is just the way Brian works. He all very, very closely with his writers on every film.
And you wonder,
Uh,
even at that point, like how much freedom do you still have? And I think that probably ties into one of our issues with the film is at this point, like the sets are already built, everything's up in Canada, so it's being kind of rewritten on the fly. There's only so much you can rewrite and do because you still have to adhere to like what's been established and what you have to
mhm.
work with.
Yeah, yeah. And Doherty said that Brian explained it to us that it's kind of a more romantic way that Hollywood used to be, where writers and directors were partners. So that's what Brian said to them. He likes that old school style.
Yeah, and I know.
Um, yeah, yeah. It says and just like X-Men 1, Mike and Dan were on the set every single day of that movie for every scene of that movie, rewriting and working.
What
Um,
happened? So what happened to my mind is blanking at the moment. fucking Metal Gear Solid homeboy who wrote the first one. What's his name?
David Hayter.
David Hayter. Yeah, what happened to him? Like,
He's got a story credit on
he doesn't have
X2.
that's what I'm wondering. Like, what was his involvement, and why wasn't he involved in a bigger capacity?
Yeah, he wrote a script for X2, but it got like rejected, and they just took some of his ideas and gave it to Dan and Brian and Mike. So I think that they brought him back to work on the second one, but I think that they were all just going in a different direction. And David's script, a lot of stuff was cut out of that to the point where it was just story stuff that was taken from him, and probably just a little bit of that. He probably only got that credit because he wrote X-Men 1.
So what you're saying is, did David Hayter age out of the Brian circle?
I know, right? Yeah, I think he did.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. It's crazy. And he said that in this article, Doherty, he's interviewed, and he says we went on the location scout, so we got a location that Brian wanted. He said we would change the scene to fit the location, so we would go back and change the scene. So so this is apparently how Brian got connected with them. So this is what Doherty said. He said Brian Singer called material and Specs, which is an independent film, is getting together right now.
Hey, sorry,
you read a Spec horror.
Sorry, you're breaking up. You're breaking up. I don't know if it like.
Oh,
because it says something about the bandwidth. So, do you want to say that part over again?
Okay. Yeah, I'm recording on my Audacity as well.
Okay, but if Audacity's okay, I didn't want to interrupt it, but there were a few moments where you were dropping out. So
yeah, sure,
continue.
No worries.
Yeah.
So basically saying Brian Singer called, he'd read our material, he had read one of Dan's spec scripts, and he had read a spec script of mine called Trick or Treat. After that, he asked us if we'd be interested in coming on board for X-Men 2, because they were in need of new writers and possibly trying out a draft. So apparently Brian read their work, maybe saw a couple photos of them and hired them.
All right, so yeah, there you go.
These people were nobody. They were nobodies. They hadn't done shit.
There you go, kids. If you want to be a writer or a behind-the-scenes person, send in that headshot. It can't hurt.
Absolutely. I mean, it doesn't say in the article that they sent in headshots, but I'm sure they did.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is just the little ending. Says, but once again, after all this crazy shit, happening on the set of X-Men 2, Singer has a huge hit on his hands, earning the X-Men 2 earned $408 million worldwide. That's $100 million more than the first one.
What was the budget?
And 150, 125, something like that.
So it's 125, and how much did it gross worldwide?
408.
Okay, so that was a very healthy profit.
Well, that's not including the toys and shit,
Of course, yeah.
So yeah, they made a lot of money. This is what Schuller Donner said, though, was that he was Brian. She's talking about Brian, saying that he was very nervous and he would act out insecure, but his way of acting out was to yell and scream at everybody on set. And Schuller Donner also said, you have to understand, the guy was brilliant, and that was why we all tolerated him and cajoled him. And if he wasn't so fucked up, he'd be a really great director.
Oh, wow.
So that's what she said. And Ralph Winter commented as well. And he said, I think X-Men, referring to the 2 X-Men films that Brian did in the early 2000s, will stand the test of time. And hopefully Brian will survive some way in his career and his work as a filmmaker and an artist. But I don't find the movie tainted in any way because of whatever all the other current events are about Brian. To me, that stuff doesn't matter.
And when was this quote? When did that come out?
This is 2018.
2018. Okay.
Yeah. So, but what I'm trying to say is that there these people like, oh, Brian, he's so fucked up or whatever. X-Men 2 made a shitload of money, and he went off to do Superman. Like, he was just doing bigger and bigger movies. Like X-Men 1 was 75. X2 was like 130 or something like that, and then Superman Returns is like 270 in terms of the budget. So like he seems to be, he's not failing upwards, he's just going up the ladder. Very interesting stuff.
So
Um,
before we move on from the production stuff, we mentioned him earlier, and I do think he is a very integral, like a huge part of X2's success. That he factors in it in a way that he was not involved with X-Men 1, and that is the inclusion of composer, editor, co-producer John Ottman.
correct. Yes. Like he was, he was busy doing his own film at the time of X-Men 1, and it didn't really do that well.
Urban Legend Final Cut, check it out. It's entertaining.
Yeah, I haven't seen it. It looks fine, but it
Yeah.
didn't really do that well. Um, like it wasn't a failure, but it wasn't a hit. And
Uh,
so he came back, to
right.
X2.
Well, when I spoke to John about it, he talked about how he wanted to be involved with X-Men 1 so bad because I guess he was a fan of the material, doing this big sci-fi epic that it was a hard choice. If a producer comes to you and be like, "Hey,
Mm.
we'll let you direct the script. You can get your feet wet as a filmmaker," or "Hey, do you want to edit and maybe score your buddy's movie?" I think for him, the choice was obvious, but it worked out in the end because he got to finally be included in X-Men 2.
Yes. And by being included, we mean co-producing, editing, and scoring it. So basically making the movie. Um,
Speaking of that, I think that's going to be a running theme in the subsequent episodes. It's like who's more responsible for Brian's success? Like he is nominally the director, and obviously he has a lot of control over it. But at the end of
mhm,
the day, you have someone else who, according to John Ottman, he's on set every day. He's making sure the train runs on time. He's editing the film and he's scoring the film, which a lot of people would argue that a movie's emotional content is created by the music. So at the end of the
absolutely.
day, like, are these art? Do I mean filmmaking is a collaborative effort, absolutely. But at the end
Sure.
of the day, who's more responsible for Brian's triumphs? Is it Brian
Especially.
himself, or is it his collaborators?
Yeah. And Siegel as well, and
Yeah,
McQuarrie, he's worked with them so many times that to the point where it's like they're more like a band, like Queen,
yeah,
rather than like Brian just doing all of his shit.
yeah.
you know just really, yeah, the further we get into Brian's like person, we'll talk about John Ottman kind of taking over these productions and maybe actually doing more of the work. So we'll see. That'll be for future episodes though.
Right, right. But in the case of X2, I mean, I think John Ottman's score is beautiful. It's extremely memorable. I think it's the most hummable X-Men theme since like the animated series in
Oh
1992.
yeah, great theme,
So when you think of like
so good.
the sweeping the X-Men theme, to me, John Ottman's score, it is what John Williams' music was to Superman or Danny Elfman is to Batman. When you think
Mhm.
of like dun 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 dun,
Yeah.
like that is X-Men. To me,
Yeah, like the
yeah,
opening with that buildup of the strings going back and forth super fast, into the
yeah.
chorus. Like it's just a great song. It's a great song, man. Dude,
Um,
superhero movies used to have such good scores. Do you remember
I remember when you could hum them like coming out of the
scores?
theater.
Oh, opening like the you're just like whoa, or the Hulk opening with the, I
Yeah.
mean, dude, it's so many good scores. Bands. What happened? There's no music in them anymore.
Well, I think we've talked about it. These movies are being churned out so fast, and then you're getting Hans Zimmer to fucking score all of them. Like you're not going to have a lot of variety.
Yeah.
Which, to be fair though, I want to give credit where credit is due. I am actually a fan of Michael Kamen's score on X-Men 1. I think it is also very memorable score, very strong.
I I enjoy that score a lot as well. It's kind of Bond like,
Yeah, yeah.
there's a lot of kind of snooping music, and it's good. It's good. I enjoy Michael Kamen. I think he's a very underrated composer.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think that first X-Men score, it does have its heroic moments, but it does feel more like a science fiction movie or a spy movie, like you mentioned. It
Yeah.
has more of that flavor. Whereas I feel like John Ottman commits to the full-on bombastic. This is a big budget superhero movie. It's
Yeah.
very heroic, very over the top, and I think it suits X2's sort of bigger canvas.
Oh yeah, it definitely fits X2's like massive canvas a lot
Yeah.
better. And plus, you could tell if John Ottman was going to do a superhero movie or like a big movie like this, he was going to go John Williams on that score because this was his time to do an actual theme. And it's a great theme. It's a great theme. And thank God they brought it back in the last two. You
Dude,
know,
I remember opening night when I was sitting in the theater for Days of Future Past. It was just so like I was overwhelmed with emotion.
me
Seeing,
too. I got goosebumps.
dude, when you see the Cerebro doors close, or like when it does like the opening, the swirl, they took it
Mm.
back to the early 2000s.
I know. And I was like, dude, thank God Brian came back.
Yeah. To me, that X-Men opening with the Cerebro doors, like that's the X-Men gun barrel. Like that's the equivalent
Yeah,
of the James Bond opening.
absolutely. Yeah, it's iconic. I really hope they keep that for the reboot. And I hope that they keep the Cerebro looking the same, like the dome, like the huge.
Well,
I hope they don't change it all too much, man, because there's a lot of really good sets in those films that they don't need to completely redo, in my
I mean,
opinion.
I agree with you, but they don't give a shit, so they will. Like, they're gonna ruin it. I mean, not ruin it, but I mean, Marvel Studios. I think the X Men franchise has lasted as long as it had. It had a good run, but I think there's a lot of bad taste in people's mouths because of the controversy surrounding it. Even like
Yeah.
the constant reboots in and of itself. Like, how many times have they adjusted the timelines with the various spin-offs and sequels? And so I do think
Yeah, there's fatigue. There was definitely fatigue
they're
for
gonna
sure.
want to once we get the Marvel Studios Disney iteration of it. I wouldn't be surprised if they try to distance themselves as much as possible visually from what Fox did.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. You might as well go in a completely different direction if you're going to reboot it.
Yeah,
I
but hey,
get that.
but they're keeping Ryan Reynolds as Deadpool. But you know my philosophy. It's not is if don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. If something works, why replace it?
Yeah, exactly. Judy Dench and Casino Royale, like casting and recasting, no one cares. Okay.
Yeah,
Stop rebooting shit. All right. Just recast people. All right. We don't need a reboot. Just recast. All
right.
right.
They kept J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson. And
Who
this
yeah.
is the third iteration of Spider-Man, and they brought him back because who's better, right?
I think it's the fourth, isn't it? Or wait, the other one was animated, right? Does that count? The animated one?
The animated one doesn't count. I mean, to me,
It
it's
doesn't
just
count.
yeah. So there's three. When we're talking about live action films, you have Tobey Maguire, uh,
Andrew
fucking
Garfield.
Andrew Garfield, sorry, and then that shows how memorable those movies were. But no, Andrew Garfield's a brilliant actor. I thought like he was too good for the material. Like
Oh
really,
yeah, he's a great artist for
yeah.
sure.
Andrew Garfield, and then now we have the Tom Holland iteration, which apparently this next Spider-Man is supposed to converge all these worlds. So it shows that Kevin Feige himself, having worked on these earlier Marvel film like X-Men,
Mhm.
Spider-Man, even Kevin Feige has a little bit of nostalgia in him.
Yeah, I hope so,
So
man. I hope
who
so.
knows? So did you want to talk about the film itself? Is there anything that sticks out in particular to you as a fan?
Oh yeah, yeah. Let's go into the movie.
Yeah,
We talked a lot about the production, but the movie is why we're here.
right.
Um, so to me, the movie, it's like every Bryan Singer movie where the opening is basically him saying, "This is serious. Sit down and watch and shut the fuck up."
Yeah,
And the opening on the black screen with the stars, and you just hear mutants, over the audio. And it's very artsy and cool, with like instead of seeing the chromosomes, it's like these stars, and it kind of looks like Cerebro.
well, real
And then we
quick.
go into the
So I was gonna say, like, regarding that, I know it was probably his homage to like 2001. Is that the Silver Surfer in the opening shot?
oh, I didn't even think about that.
That was a
Maybe.
that was a huge fan theory going on. I know that was Brian's love letter to 2001, but is it also setting up a
Uh,
possible greater Marvel universe?
Ooh, that's cool. I had not heard about that. Maybe he
Yeah,
was. I don't
yeah,
know. Maybe he was planning ahead. But either way, you have that cool opening. Then you go into the awesome credits of the DNA and the Ottman music that we talked about. And you are
yeah.
just set for a great movie. And then you go into the actual opening with the Nightcrawler essentially doing a terrorist attack against the White House to assassinate the president, right? This is a
Yeah.
post 9/11 X-Men movie. It's 2003. We're all under attack, and Nightcrawler's there. It's just interesting. like with talking about like Lincoln, like the quote about Lincoln in the beginning. And I don't know, it's just all like the tour guide, bringing the kids through the White House, and she's like, Abraham Lincoln, this and that. And I was like, yes, dude, free the slaves, free the mutants,
Yeah.
that thought put into it by the writers and Brian, staggering. That's just a throwaway line in the beginning, and then you just see Nightcrawler in front of the that famous JFK painting with his hands crossed, like looking down, and they're both
Yeah.
doing the same. So Brian's clearly foreshadowing the revelation in Days of Future Past that JFK was a mutant, right?
Yeah.
So like there's just a lot going on in that opening.
Well, speaking of that, it's
What do you think?
well, no, that sequence is so iconic. That opening White House scene, I think it's paralleled a lot when I think about, like, in retrospect, with Days of Future Past, with the raiding of the Pentagon when they're trying to
Mhm.
take Magneto out. There's a lot of similar imagery.
Yeah, there really is. Yeah,
Yeah.
I thought that when I was rewatching X2 for this, was how similar that imagery was,
Yeah.
with them walking through the hallways and
The tour
stuff.
guides and everything.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think is what this is what my this is just my theory, but I think everybody loved X-Men 2 because of that opening. That's why everyone loved it. This, like we said, the last half of the movie's in a bunker. It's kind of slow. There's a lot of talking in it, but I think that first scene with him teleporting all over the place and just fucking killing everybody, like everyone's like, "This is the greatest movie ever made," or no, "This is the greatest superhero movie ever made." Look at the music, all of it.
Well, my dad would always tell me that a movie is only as good as the first 5 minutes. If the movie's boring in the first 5 minutes, you're gonna clock out. Like, it's
Mhm.
fuck. I mean, it doesn't matter how good the rest of it is. If you're a good filmmaker, you need to catch the audience's attention as soon as possible. And X2 obviously does that.
Do you like the opening?
Oh, I mean, yeah, it's brilliantly done, very suspenseful. I remember at the time, I remember first seeing it, I knew Nightcrawler is a good guy, so I was sort of
Mhm.
puzzled by it. I was like, oh, why is he trying to assassinate the president? But then that's when the mystery unfolds throughout the film.
Sure,
It does a good job setting up
sure.
the movie. I think in a lot of ways, speaking of Days of Future Past, the X2 Nightcrawler shot was sort of like the foreshadowing of what the Quicksilver scenes
Oh
in the
yeah,
later films. Like,
yeah.
that was Brian's sort of first hand at a big, like, okay, this is what this mutant skill set is. How can we make the most of it and make it as visually interesting as possible?
Yeah, I just really like the how political X-Men 2 is. This is going to be kind of my thesis of the film, is how political it is.
Oh,
It's
speaking of
very
that,
political.
do you mind if I kind of if I can steer the conversation real quick into, like,
Please.
okay, so when you talk about how political X2 was, again, also leading into what we would get with Days of Future Past, X-Men 2 was one of the first major comic book movies to be a straight adaptation of maybe not straight adaptation, but to borrow heavily from an established graphic novel.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Talk about that.
So X-Men 2 has been credited as being based on, or at least inspired by, an arc in the comics called God Loves, Man Kills, which, I say arc in the comics, it was published as a standalone, oversized issue. Actually, could you give me a second? I want to grab my copy right now. I don't want to.
Yeah, dude, I'd love to see it.
So this is the extended cut. This is a recent anniversary edition, but
Of
it's
the
a
graphic
facsimile
novel.
of the graphic novel. Yeah. So this is X-Men, God Loves, Man Kills.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was written by Chris Claremont, and I believe the illustrator is Brent Eric Anderson. And it's beautifully illustrated. This was one where it almost has, if you look at the artwork, it almost has like a hand painted feel to it.
Mm.
It doesn't have the flat kind of 2D shading that you would see in a lot of the comic books of that era. It's
Okay.
beautifully illustrated. So a lot of the major plot points, the idea of a villain named William Stryker who wants to kidnap Charles Xavier out of revenge and have him power his own weapon that would in turn kill all of the mutants once and for all. That is based directly on the events of God Loves, Man Kills. What's
Mm.
interesting about that, though, is in contrast to, in the film, Brian Cox plays Colonel William Stryker, who's a military man. He's a free, I think he's a government contractor with his own
And
flag
he is the
office.
villain of the film as well.
No. Yeah, in the film that this is Colonel William Stryker, who's
Yeah.
directly involved with the Weapon X program that gave Wolverine his adamantium skeleton.
Hmm.
In the comics, the villain is William Stryker, but he's Reverend William Stryker. He's a mainstream. Uh, he's a Christian televangelist with a
Oh
huge
yeah.
following. So sense
Mhm.
of his sense of rage against mutant kind, it's fueled by religious fanaticism. It's built more on righteousness because he feels like this is
Mhm.
right. It kind of has a similar origin. It does suggest that Stryker has a military background because when he was a younger man, his wife gave birth to a mutant, and he was so horrified, and he's forced to kill his wife and make it look like a terrible. He's a terrible motherfucker.
Yeah.
But the comic is interesting because I think it does have something to say about the hypocrisy of religion, especially mainstream media-based religion, and how people can
And this
use.
is the 80s.
Yeah,
This came
let me see. I want.
during like the rise of the like is it during the rise of the Christian right and Reagan and all that? Because it does sound like reaction to that 80s like revivalist of like evangelicalism, the revival of that of like evangelical Christianity. I don't know. It might be common. I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
absolutely. I don't want to misquote it. Like, okay, 1982 is when the original story
Yeah.
was published.
Yep, that sounds about right. Also explains why they would change it. If Stryker's kind of a reactionary figure, you go from the Reagan televangelist to the post 9/11 military,
Yeah.
right? I think that's a good transition to bring it to modern day. I think that's a really good decision by whoever made that decision. Maybe Brian, I don't know, but
And
that
in
was
the
a good
film,
decision.
he is called Colonel William Stryker. Obviously, has an affiliation with the president in the film, but isn't it implied that he has his own, what do you call it, like a Blackwater, like mercenary team? He kind of runs his own underground.
Yeah, he has like an off the books military installation with
Right.
his
Yeah.
own soldiers to do like experimental shit pretty much.
Yeah.
Like for the quote unquote homeland security and the safety of America. Once again, very post 9/11, also very prophetic to Blackwater and shit now,
Right.
and like all of that stuff going on with these private mercenary armies going to foreign countries on our behalf. Like this is all very much like Brian is clearly very much commenting on our own imperialistic military and the way that there's really no oversight and they can do whatever the fuck they want, you know.
Why do you think that was popular? Like at the time, again, this is 2003. We're post 9/11. I believe like the Iraq War had it started at that point officially. Had we gone into Iraq or?
Yeah, we I don't think we had gotten in when X-Men came out. I think we went into Iraq later that year, but it
Okay.
was but we were in Afghanistan already.
Right.
So
So
so we had been fighting in Afghanistan for about 2 years or a year and a half, I think, when X2 came out. So we were already pretty tired, I think, America.
right. So that's what's interesting too. You would think like the military, and it's proven that the military does work with Hollywood to give them like a percentage. Hey, if you promote us, we'll let you use our weaponry. We'll let us use our
Mhm.
machinery.
Yeah, they did that for Black Hawk Down.
Of course, yeah, but in a case like this, where the military, at least the military figure in the film, he's not portrayed in a flattering light. Well, why do you think it was okay by 2003 to talk about that instead of like, oh, the Muslims are the enemy, Iraq is
Mhm.
the enemy, we need to band together because of 9/11? Like you said, at this point, we're kind of tired of it, and it's like, okay, who's the real villain? Is it these
Mhm.
overseas? Is it these abstract figures in another country, or is our own government manipulating these events for
And is the
great? Yeah,
military running our government pretty
exactly.
much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So why do you
Uh,
think it was okay to talk about this in 2003?
I think that there was a lot of disillusionment in America with the
Yeah.
military back then because they quote unquote let 9/11 happen.
Mhm.
There was a huge rush of autism, but also a fear that our military was inadequate and that our homeland security was woefully unprepared for anything resembling a threat. So I
Mhm.
think that, because in Hulk as well, the military are the villain, right? These
Yeah.
movies both came out the same year, within months of each other, I think.
Yeah.
And I think there was a sense in America, there was a growing anti-war sentiment in the summer of 2003 when they were trying to lie to us into Iraq,
Yeah.
where there was a huge anti-war protest by people around the world about not going into Iraq, especially here and in Britain, because Tony Blair was kind of our lapdog.
Yeah.
So I think what Bryan Singer is doing in X-Men 2 is essentially saying that more war and more violence and trusting these military people, it's only going to lead to genocidal race war, pretty much,
Right.
you know.
Right.
And that's a really powerful statement, I think, by Singer to make in a fucking mainstream superhero movie. It's incredible. This is why we need him. This is why we need him now more than ever to keep making movies.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you think? Do you think that there's that much thought put into it, or do you think it's just a coincidence and that's just what was going on at the time?
I think it's a little bit of everything. I think for good or bad, that I mean, there probably are forces like working within Hollywood saying this is an agenda we want to push. I think we see it nowadays in movies,
Sure.
in the popular culture. Um, in the case of X-Men too, I think yeah, clearly William Stryker is not shown in a flattering light. So,
Mm.
and Bryan Singer is a smart guy. I think he understands the X-Men comic books, the cartoons. They are ultimately about social commentary. So if he can use his platform to make something that's relevant or interesting for the contemporary audience, that maybe there's more to it. It's just not guys in spandex blowing each other up. There is a
Mhm.
little bit of a richer meaning that we can apply, or at least we can see parallels in our everyday life. So I do think a lot of it is intentional.
Yeah, I think that's why Brian was so perfect to do specifically X-Men
Yeah.
and not like another superhero, is because he feels the same way, you
Well, hey,
know.
I think
Uh,
everybody that hated Superman Returns would agree with you. But I'm not one of those people. I'm a fan.
Everyone loves Superman Returns. What are you talking about? It's the biggest hit of all time. Oh man. But okay. Let's go back to the movie for a sec.
Yeah.
Like for specific scenes. I'm not gonna go through the whole movie, but
Why is
I want
Iceman gay?
what?
I said, why is Iceman gay? I'm
Bobby?
joking. But yeah, no, no, I'm joking. Okay, so like we'll get to that. But yeah, what are your thoughts
Okay.
on this?
Okay. Um So, there's a whole storyline in X-Men 2 that we have to talk about because we brought up Stryker, about Logan's quest for his origin, his
Yeah,
quest for his memories, and his quest for his thing. So there's a lot of scenes of Logan standing in front of a lake looking sad and stuff like that. But I think what's interesting is that, you know, X2, after you see that opening shot of Logan, it
yeah,
fades to the teachers touring a museum with their classes and teaching them stuff. So
yeah,
it's already X2, like, and already in this film, Brian is doubling down on the school. Like the school is even bigger. There's more kids, you know what I mean? And
yeah.
and like we said, that's a huge, huge thing for him, you know. Um, I don't know. And also, do Gene and Scott have like, are they married in that film? Or they live together? Are they married? It seems like they have like a common law marriage or something, you
Well, don't they
know?
all live? Don't they all live together at the school?
Yeah, but they're sleeping together, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think they're a
Yeah.
couple. They're an item, but I don't know if they're officially married at that point.
Yeah. I just think once again, a lot of relationships going on in this mansion.
Yeah,
Okay.
dude.
So
Why doesn't Logan hook
after
up with
that,
Storm?
with Storm.
Yeah, like why not? Dude, she's Halle Berry. She's fine as hell. Like, Jean's great, but it's not worth the drama, right?
I mean, I was asking that in X-Men 1, dude.
Yeah,
I'm just like, Halle Berry's right there. What the hell are you doing? They're both Bond girls. I'm
yeah,
sorry.
they are. Yeah. Well,
Uh,
Halle Berry. Okay, well, Halle Berry became a Bond girl in between X-Men 1 and X-Men 2.
that's true. That's true. Yeah. So now you definitely should pursue her, in my
Is,
opinion.
is
If you're
Nightcrawler
Wolverine, you're Hugh Jackman. You're Hugh Jackman. What's she gonna say? No.
right? Right. Well, hey, dude, like, is Nightcrawler a Bond girl? Does he count?
So after that, we have our
Yeah,
introduction of the new Pyro. All right. So the new Pyro, played by an actual actor this time around, and Bobby and Rogue, right? When they're being bullied by these jocks.
Yeah.
In this in the cafeteria of the museum, and then Professor X stops time and they all have to gather at the house because there's been an attack on the president. But I just think it's all interesting, just once again, Brian, the bullying, in every X-Men movie, the bullying,
Yeah.
he really cares about victims of bullying. And I think he was bullied for being a mutant as a child just because he was gay,
And Jewish, probably.
and Jewish
Yeah.
and adopted. And I mean, that's 3 strikes right there. Just kidding. But I don't know. I just think in like they all the time stoppage. Also, Brian Peck has another cameo as a news reporter reporting on the attack on the White House. We talked
Yeah.
about him a little bit last time. He did the commentary with Bryan Singer on X-Men 1 and also had a cameo in that. And Gary Goddard, I think, also has a cameo in X-Men 2 as well. So he brought both of them back for
Okay.
cameos as well.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that later. Um, let's see. Um, so I want to talk about the introduction to Stryker a little bit, that how he's introduced in front of the president, you know, where you realize it's discovered that Stryker is the guy who created the plastic prison at the end of X-Men 1. That's kind of like that's what's revealed. So you get this kind of, he's already kind of a villain in part 1 just by building the prison, you know what I mean?
They're retroactively introducing him into part 1.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of cool. I like when
Yeah.
sequels do that. I'm a big fan of the Saw franchise. They do that a lot as well.
Hmm.
And but like, you have Kelly, who's Meek, Senator Kelly versus Stryker, and they have this great argument where Stryker's like, we're already in war. If you don't think this is a war, you're an idiot, pretty much. Like, don't tell me we're not in a war. This is a war. And once again, post 9/11 America, we are at war. The war is coming.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know. I think this is one thing I wanted to ask you about. I really love the relationship between Wolverine and Rogue in X-Men 1, and it seems completely abandoned in the second one.
Well, I think X-Men 2, the idea is it's like there's a lot of they care, even though it's called X-Men United, it's kind of like the Empire Strikes Back and that the characters kind of go their separate ways. So you have one group of people, which it's Jean, it's Storm, it's Nightcrawler. Then you have Logan, he's with Bobby and Rogue, and then I mean, yes, they all culminate in the final act.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the idea, like after X-Men 2, I think the implication, excuse me, at the end of X-Men 1, Rogue sort of found her independence and she had a better sense of self, so she was able to kind of pursue her own life and her own relationship
Oh, okay.
with
Yeah.
Bobby. And then at the end of X-Men 1, Logan goes off to learn more about his past. And so I think in X-Men 1, Rogue needed Logan as a protector, but I feel like at this point they're kind of on their own 2 feet trying to figure out their place.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I guess
yeah,
story wise, it definitely makes sense. I guess I just missed that relationship. I really liked it.
yeah,
It was very wholesome for a Bryan Singer film.
yeah,
Okay, so there's this great scene in X-Men 2 where Brian Cox / Stryker goes in and beats the shit out of Ian McKellen, drugs him up and forces him to give info about Cerebro,
yeah,
which we were already by the way, in 2003 we were already in trouble for Guantanamo, or not Guantanamo, but for like rendition and torturing people
yeah,
without,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and like the Geneva Convention had obviously been broken. And I think that whether Brian's talking about that or not, we definitely all knew it. So you could have a scene like that in a PG-13 superhero movie because it was happening, So I think like, there's a lot about the military forcing people to rat on each other or to kill each other. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? People they don't like, forcing the mutants to fight each other or to rat on each other, and creating their own mutants pretty
Yeah.
much. Like this is just all very Bryan Singer, you know.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Let's see. So why do you think because Brian was raised Catholic, anything Prowler's religious
I'm sorry.
the wrong part?
You're breaking up again. Do you want to wait a beat and then you can repeat that?
Okay, can we
No,
good? Nope.
hold on a second. Um, all right, try doing it now.
Hello?
Yes,
Hello? Are you
yeah.
there?
Now you're
Okay.
good. You're good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So I was just wondering what you thought about Nightcrawler's Catholicism when we found out in episode 1 that Brian was raised Catholic. And do you think that was that a coincidence just from the book? And if so, why do you think Brian put so much emphasis on it in the film?
Well, I mean, I think we've established that Brian has an affinity for the disenfranchised, the outsider, someone who's different, but then who's trying to find their own humanity and sense of self. Nightcrawler in the comics, he is a religious Catholic. He's a monk. Or at different points, like in the animated series, he's introduced as being part of a monastery.
Hmm.
So his deep reverence for religion is something that was already established. But if I was Brian, and then you're taking this horribly demonic looking figure like Kurt Wagner, right? And you're trying to give him a
Mhm.
sense of humanity. What better than that contrast of the devout spirituality while looking like a horrific monster? I mean, to me, that's just a
Mhm.
beautiful
Great
contrast, right?
character. Great
Yeah, to me,
character.
Brian
Yeah.
Singer, like to me, anybody, you'd be a fool not to play up that angle. But I think Brian
Mhm.
Singer does it beautifully because to me, it's so obvious. I think.
Yeah. Yeah. He does it very sensitively. I like
Yeah,
that. He doesn't judge him for being religious, which a lot of movies do.
yeah.
Um let's see. One second. I'm going through my notes here. We can edit this shit out.
Actually, you know what? It's interesting you bring that up because when you think about it, in X-Men Apocalypse, it's not. I don't. Do they reference Nightcrawler's religion?
No.
Yeah, because it's such an integral part. But then by the time you get to X-Men Apocalypse in 2016, it's. I mean, they might reference it in passing, but it's not.
Oh no, he does
Right.
pray. He prays,
He
doesn't
does
he?
pray. Okay.
Yeah. He
So there.
prays on the ship at the end when they're going to fight Oscar Isaac, right? Is that
Right.
it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. 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 There is a reference. Okay. My bad.
Yeah. But yeah, it's very subtle. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, dude, I love the introduction of the little kid that can change TV channels with his eyes at the Xavier School for the Gifted.
Not,
Uh,
not the kid with the tongue.
no, no.
Yeah.
And like he's just like, I don't sleep, I never sleep or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's such a great introduction because he's the first kid that is a casualty of the military raid on the
Yeah.
school. I just think that's a really good introduction for that character. It's like
Yeah.
2 3 seconds, 5 seconds maybe, but it really works when you bring him back and you see him get tranquilized by a bunch of Blackwater soldiers.
Yeah.
um but I really love because okay, this is what I want to say about Brian and how I want to talk about how Brian shows the powers of his people. And I love it because he's so subtle. He's so subtle. For example, when Bobby blows on the Coke, right, to ice it up, and you
Is it a
just get
Dr. Pepper? Is it a
the
Dr.
Dr. Pepper, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
sorry. To ice it up for Hugh Jackman, and it's just like a little and it gets a little white, and that's it.
Yeah.
Like in Superman Returns, when Superman flies, he's pretty silent. He's very quiet, very peaceful compared to the jet-like sounds of the new one, right?
Yeah.
And I love the subtlety and grace in which he films the powers. It's very old school, it's very graceful, it's very subtle. And just little stuff like that, it's world building. You're
Right.
not watching a guy shoot shit out of his eyes for 2 hours. Like you're just like, oh, he can actually live with this. He's like a real person, and just good shit, man.
That
I
is
appreciate the way that Brian films his superpowers.
that is an interesting point.
Yeah, so I think that Brian really is exploring relationships more in this film, like romantic relationships than he
Yeah.
had in his previous 3 or 4. And there's this great, like, after Bobby ices up the Dr. Pepper, he's like, I seen how you look at Dr. Gray, and it's just like really, it's just Brian, he'll make time for subtle stuff like that,
Yeah.
where it's not like you like her, ha ha ha, like someone would say in an MCU movie now. It's like, and I've seen how you look at Dr. Gray. And there's no fat gay black guy in the back going, what? You know what I mean? Like every fucking modern MCU movie.
It's not the Eternals.
Yeah. And like I just appreciate how seriously Brian takes the material and the subtlety of the relationships, because that's really going to set the stage for Superman Returns, which is going to be his next film, which is definitely his most the film he's made that is most about relationships.
Well, I do think, yeah, the idea of like the love triangle is very important with between Scott, Jean,
Mhm,
Logan. It
mhm,
was a definitely huge part in the first X-Men movie, and I think kind of culminates in this one.
mhm.
But it should be noted, one of the flaws of X-Men 2, and again, it's made even worse with the passage of time. If you look in retrospect, it's made even worse with the X-Men: The Last Stand.
Uh,
Is the sidelining of Cyclops as the
mhm.
Wolverine
Yep.
King.
Yep.
One
I
thing
don't
I
know if he that
what's
is bullshit.
Yeah, one thing I love about X-Men 1, I feel like each character plays their role perfectly and each character is given something to do. So even
Hmm.
though Logan and Rogue are the leads of X-Men 1, Cyclops' role as leader is still very strongly established and he still feels like an integral part of the story.
Yeah.
Whereas
Yeah,
in X-Men
definitely.
2, he's sidelined, he's knocked out of commission by Lady Deathstrike early on, and then he comes
Very
back.
early.
Yeah, and then he's just like a henchman in the last act, and then he comes back to cry at the very end, and that's it.
He's not even in like the middle part of the movie. Like he doesn't.
Exactly,
There's
he's
not
out of
even
it.
a shot of him. There's not even one shot of him.
Yeah,
Um. Yeah, I don't know why they did that. But there's two scenes I want to talk about before we
right,
wrap
right.
up. I want to talk about the military raid on the school,
Yeah,
and then I want to talk about the coming out with Bobby and his parents. I
sure.
want to talk about two scenes.
Yeah,
So with the military raid, when the soldiers, there's this great shot where the soldiers are creeping in, holding these guns in camo. Their faces painted with black and green. They got these green lasers pointing at everyone. There's like four of them pointing at the little kid
yeah,
who could change the TV, who can change the TV with his eyes.
yeah,
And he says hi. He says hi to them, and they shoot him in the neck with a tranquilizer and he falls down.
yeah.
Okay. There's nothing subtle about what Brian is doing in this scene. It's very clear whose side he is on, you know. And you get like just that shot of the camera going over the soldier's back, with the little kid looking up at him like this. He just goes, hi. Like a shot.
Yeah.
And like there's just so many great little things, like the girl running through the walls, because the military are just fucking kidnapping everybody. It's a fucking raid, which I think is one of Brian's biggest fears for his own life, is if his mansions get raided by the fucking military or
There-
police, because God knows what they'll find.
That is a very good point. Yeah. Dude, they're after
But
Brian's kids. They're after
I
his
know they're trying to take his kids away.
Yeah,
That's for the next episode. I'm sorry.
right.
But what I do like about it is when Wolverine goes around killing all the soldiers, it's very cathartic. You're happy, after you see everything Stryker's done to these people. To see Wolverine going around killing American soldiers and cheering, I think I automatically give the movie a pass for that. That's just awesome. That's awesome. That is so ballsy to do. So I love that. And like windows blow up, there's a helicopter flying over it. It's like they think that they're like Al Qaeda or something like that.
Yeah,
And and then of course Stryker meets Logan between the wall, the ice wall
I
that
swear, yeah.
that Bobby builds. And there's this beautiful shot of Logan and Stryker like saying hi, or like doing a Rathacon hand thing,
Yeah,
and Brian said that he had that wall of ice shipped in specifically, and set up the lights behind it in a specific way to make Stryker's shadow go in 3 different places and fade out, and keep going back and forth. So it's a very composed shot.
so Brian knows what he's doing. He knows what he wants.
Clearly.
Yeah,
But so I just think that scene to me is very powerful, very anti-imperialism, anti-American military, and basically saying power to the mutants and fuck the soldiers, which is a really good message. And I think more movies need to say that.
sure. I agree.
Um, so I mean, there's a lot, we could go into a lot more of this, but I do want to talk about the scene, the coming out scene,
Have you
where
tried? Have you tried not being a mutant?
like where Bobby is forced to come out as a mutant to his family and his jealous younger brother, to which they do not respond kindly and pretty much kick him out of their lives. This is what essentially happens. And I think what Brian is doing in this scene is there's nothing subtle about it, you know. And I think Brian being gay, this is the scene, okay, where it's about him, in my opinion. I think he is Bobby in that scene. And him being ratted out by his own family, I think, is something that Brian is very familiar with. You know, when and also there's a paranoia to this film, to X-Men 2, that Brian is being hunted, right? He's on the run, he's being hunted. And I think that a lot of that has to do with his friend Brian Peck, who has a cameo in the film, being sentenced to prison and him going away, which we'll talk about in another episode. But there's a real paranoia to the film. There's an anxiousness or an anxiety and Brian is clearly feels like he's on the run and he's being targeted, you know, very different from X-Men 1. I don't know, but I like that scene. What do you think of those two scenes, the raid and the coming out scene?
I thought the coming out scene at the time, it's like, oh, this is pretty funny. Like, this is clever. And what is being a mutant if not an allegory for sexuality, being a minority, anything, an outsider? So to me, it seemed pretty obvious, but I think it kind of works in both. Like, it works as a literal scene and as a metaphor. It's kind of funny, actually, in the comics, within the last couple of years, they retconned it. So Bobby in the comics is literally gay in addition to being a mutant.
Oh, is he really? I didn't know that.
Well, he wasn't originally, but then it was, you know, Marvel, they're trying to get the broader demographic, I guess.
By appealing to less people.
I guess so. But it is kind of interesting that I'm sure that sequence played a huge part in Marvel wanting to go in that direction in a literal sense.
It's a hell of a scene.
Yeah.
And the guy who plays Pyro, that's also his introduction for how massive his powers are.
And
I like the way
Aaron Stanford, right? Is he the actor
who plays Pyro? Right.
Yeah. Aaron Stanford is Pyro, and then Bobby Drake is why am I blanking, dude?
I don't know. He's on a shitload of stuff now, though. He's like really famous.
Yeah, dude, he was just in The Boys.
Isn't he The Boys? Yeah, he's great in The Boys. He plays like some fallen hero or something.
Sean Ashmore. Yeah, respect.
Sean Ashmore. How did I forget that? Yeah, that's hey man, but I do like how Brian films Pyro's powers. I still think it's very elegant, it's classy. It's cool, you know. It doesn't look like a Zack Snyder destruction scene where you can't see shit, you know.
I love the fire and ice contrast too. Like all these powers. Like they're setting, again, this is another plot point. They're setting it up for payoff in X-Men 3, which there was kind of, but it wasn't what we were hoping for. It wasn't.
I didn't like what they did with Pyro in X-Men 3.
Yeah.
I didn't like that at all.
And what was it?
So
what else did you ask me about that scene and then another one?
The raid. Military raid.
Oh, I mean, I think it's definitely a high point of the film. We get to see Wolverine's Berserker rage for the first time. It's very well done, and I don't think like Wolverine would get he kind of gets a scene like that in X-Men Apocalypse, but I think it did a real good job solidifying Hugh Jackman as that character. I know he's too tall, he's too good looking, like whatever. I mean, to me, that scene.
He's an actor. What do you want? Like he's the lead of the movie. You want Bob Hoskins? Like
right.
I don't know what.
I never second guessed. Yeah, no, right? Yeah, like I never second guessed Hugh Jackman, but I feel like the raid sequence really solidified him as the character for an entire generation.
Well said. I totally agree with that. Okay, last thing. We're going to talk about one more thing because we need to bring it up.
Yeah, I have to head out in a little bit, but yeah, just let's talk about this.
We got to bring it up.
Yeah.
The tunnels, the bunker. What the fuck?
Dude, well, I was thinking app pupil, the tunnels. He's running down. We're running down tunnels.
There's more tunnels. There's so many more, and they all connect. and there's tunnels underneath the mansion. There's secret
Yeah.
tunnels underneath the mansion that Brian, like, does he have secret ways out of his mansions if he gets raided by the police? Do you think?
Probably. He's telling us something.
But I don't know, man. The bunker and the tunnels. I gotta hear your opinion on the fucking bunker and why does half the movie take place in a bunker? Can you tell me that?
X-Men 2, it's interesting. It's one of those films where when I think about it in retrospect, all I remember is like, oh, they're just wandering around an underground bunker the whole time. And then you go back and watch the movie, it's like, oh, it's just a small part. But no, it's literally the second half of the movie is the final act, is that entire Alkali Lake, right? The Alkali Lake
Yes, yes.
installation. Yeah, like half.
Striker's lair.
Yeah,
Mm,
I do think that's where the movie kind of loses me a little bit because X-Men 1, they had to cut so much stuff at the last minute. It is a very tightly paced film. There's nothing
mm,
inessential in that movie. Like everything that's there is required to propel the story. Whereas I feel like X-Men 2, it probably could have
mm,
used a little bit of that leaner editing to
hmm.
get to the point a little faster. But yeah, there's a lot. I mean, I don't know if I really have an opinion on the bunkers. It's just a little bit too much of the movie is set in those tunnels for my
Mm.
taste.
And they leave and come out of the tunnels like 3 times. There's all these
Yeah,
weird plot devices that make them have to go back in these tunnels, and I don't
yeah.
know what that means regarding Brian. But I also, the last thing I wanted to bring up about the bunker is the female Wolverine. I forget her name.
Lady
Um,
Kelly Who plays Lady Deathstrike.
and I find her death scene really really good. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Something I paid closer attention to the last time I watched the film is there's little moments where in the film, I believe she has like the silver irises, or her eyes are kind of an unnatural color. But
They're
then in the film,
metallic.
they're metallic. So early on, it sets up that William Stryker, he's got that like that little stamp
This
tool,
the serum, yeah,
the
yeah, the
serum,
serum.
the mind control serum. So early
Mm,
on in the film, you kind of see her like she's waking up out of like a dream like wait, where am I? And then as soon as he notices that, boom, she's back on it. So you have this
mm,
amazing fight sequence where she's this unstoppable killer with her claws and they're just going at it. It's a very intense scene, but then this time it hit even harder once Wolverine, like what, he puts the adamantium pumps into her body and then he injects it into her. So I guess that's the only way to take out
hmm
someone with that skill set. And then you see her eyes, they turn back to the natural color, and it's so fucking tragic because you realize like, oh shit, she's dying in this horrific way, and that's the only way that she can come out of this dream, this whole nightmare sequence until it's too
hmm
late. So yeah, it's a
She's so
very
like,
effective scene.
yeah, and she's so creepy looking the whole movie, and then you see her at
Yeah,
the end, and she's so pretty, and she looks so young, like she looks way younger, like
yeah,
I really like that scene. I
yeah.
think Brian, it's just Brian Singer being a great director. But
Absolutely. I know like there's been some debate because like Lady Deathstrike in the comics, she had a longer past with Wolverine in Japan. I think they were lovers at one point.
oh, okay.
At least in the animated series, they played that up. So she had a much richer background. And I don't think she was a mutant. She was actually a cyborg who had these metal like claw implants.
Oh, okay.
But the movie, for the sake of simplification, now this is a trope that I think like Marvel Studios has kind of doubled down on, and it's kind of boring. The idea of the arch enemy being a doppelganger, being like, oh, here's the Hulk and here's the Abomination. He's the evil Hulk. Or oh, it's
Oh,
Iron Man. Iron Man is fighting an evil Iron Man, or Doctor Strange, it's someone else with the same skill set. Or
mhm.
even like in the recent like Venom, Let There Be Carnage. Oh, it's Venom and it's a red Venom fighting each other. It's
Isn't he
like
already fighting Spider-Man? How many red Venoms can he possibly fight?
right. Well, like Tom Hardy has not fought Spider-Man yet, but I do feel like
Oh, sorry. Sorry. I am not up to date on the Tom Hardy Venom universe.
right. But like in the case of X-Men, like in X-Men 1, you had Wolverine versus Sabretooth. So similar skill sets, similar powers, they were paired up. And then now, like, okay, Sabretooth was is out of the picture. How do we get that like Wolverine versus Wolverine action?
Mhm.
Well, even in X-Men 1, you quite literally have Wolverine versus Mystique as Wolverine.
Great fight. Great fight.
So I do think, yeah, in X-Men 2, Lady Deathstrike is kind of reduced to being the Wolverine clone for the sake of the action sequence. That said, I do think the action sequence is very well done.
Do you think Brian is constantly at war and fighting with himself, and that does so many?
I mean, aren't we all though? At the end of the day,
But isn't it cool that his movies are talking about that stuff instead of for no reason?
right? And I do think that's why they're worth talking about today, even almost 20 years later. There's still a lot
Yeah.
of good material to discuss.
Yeah, guys. And we're, by the way, we're just scratching the surface of X2. Like we're just doing, I mean, we're tired, but we don't need to go into more about X2, but what I'm saying, there's a lot of depth to that film. And this is literally just scratching the surface of it. So I highly recommend listening to the commentary that he does with Newton Thomas Siegel, that Bryan Singer does with Newton Thomas Siegel. There's a
Yeah,
lot of good information in there. And there's a lot of good information in the 2-disc DVD thing that product that Bryan put out. He was one of the pioneers of special features and 2-disc DVDs. That's another one. That's another kind of big thing that Bryan really did with X-Men 1.5.
yeah.
I think he was inspired by episode 1's 2-disc release and wanted to do something similar. So he
Dude,
was always on the cutting edge of stuff like that.
well, dude, special edition DVDs were the shit back in the day. Those 2 disc sets when like people
Awesome.
they cared about special features. Now everything is streaming, not so much. It's not at the top.
Yeah, it's hard to find like streaming stuff where you can watch it with commentaries and stuff. I don't think
Yeah.
I've ever seen that where you can watch it where you can stream a movie and there's commentary options. I've
Well,
never seen that.
I know like on Vudu or Movies Anywhere, you have like if you buy the digital copy, sometimes they will offer that, but on Netflix, Disney Plus, no, like that's not happening. You have to have the physical media or at least buy the digital copy to have the access to the special features.
God. You see like, for all of Brian's crazy production stories, listen to the commentary. You'll get a firsthand view and enjoy the special features because they're kind of they're old hat now, I guess.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting too is I think we touched upon this in the X-Men episode, is now X2 is part of the Disney family. You can go on Disney Plus and it's streaming there with the rest of the Marvel cinematic library, so it's been absorbed into the mouse.
Yeah, yeah, and it's always on FX, as are all of Bryan Singer's X-Men movies. They're never taking them off of FX. You're stuck with them. Deal
Yeah.
with it, and all of you haters can go suck a dick. None of y'all will ever be as important as Bryan Singer or ever touch as many people's lives positively as Bryan Singer. Fuck you. That's all I have to say about that.
And you may not touch as many people physically as Bryan Singer.
You haven't touched anyone. It's physically. You haven't touched anyone. Okay. Bryan Singer's touched many people. You haven't touched anyone. That's why you're so upset.
Right. So real quick, just to prove how big of a fan I am of this franchise, I don't know if we're gonna use the video portion, but here I'm gonna move the camera over a bit. Hold up a second.
Oh, hell yes. Yes, I knew it.
Can you see it? I don't know. There's like a glare.
Yeah, there's a glare.
Hold up. Let me see if I can. Oh, shit.
Oh, here we go. Okay.
Here we go.
Hell yes.
That dude. Yeah. Like, is that not love? Right.
Of course it
So
is.
my heart is in the right place.
Dude, I love those. I love like his Logan's costume. Like that costume
The
specifically.
X2 costume.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's pretty cool. The piping, like you said, the piping.
Each character corresponds to the character. Like, so in the comics, at one point, Wolverine had an orange and brown costume.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that shit. I was like, wow, Bryan Singer really cares.
Right. So in the costume, so in the films, they incorporated that into the design. I know with Scott, it's harder to see. So with Cyclops, they incorporate the blue piping into the suit. And if
Oh, I can't see that.
yeah, it's hard to tell on the figure, but in the film, you can see the blue piping, and then on Storm, she has silver piping.
Yeah, that's cool.
As
That's
does Iceman, as does Bobby over here. So
the
yeah,
Iceman.
and I like the contrast. Like with my display, you have the earliest Toy Biz action figures from
I
like
know, I saw
1980s.
that. I was like, it's very well set up.
And you have like these beautifully sculpted and rendered like modern day Hot Toys interpretations where it's like we've come such a long way
We
that I
really have.
yeah, but I do enjoy the clash of colors and imagery and how they complement
Hmm.
each other. So yeah,
Damn, that is commitment, my friend.
thank
Love
you.
it.
Well,
Love it.
Connor, Thank you so much for joining me here today. It's always a pleasure to talk about these films. I do think in
Mhm.
the next episode, if you have any more thoughts or ideas that we didn't cover in this one, we can always kind of bring that into the next one
Okay.
for
Okay.
X2. So, once again, my name is Ryan Bijan,
I'm Connor Quade.
and thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you.